London, 1783. A father named Thomas Barrett stood in the shadow of the Old Bailey courthouse, his hands trembling as he clutched a single loaf of bread. The bread was stale, worth perhaps 4 shillings at most. His children had not eaten in 3 days. Within the hour, a judge in a powdered wig would sentence him to hang from the gallows at Tyburn, his body left to swing as a warning to every other desperate soul in the city. But here is what they never tell you in the history books. Death by hanging was considered the merciful option. What I am about to reveal will shatter everything you thought you knew about British civilization. About justice, about the empire that claimed to bring enlightenment to a quarter of the world's population. For over 3 centuries, Britain operated under something historians quietly refer to as the Bloody Code. This was not simply a harsh legal system. This was organized terror wrapped in the language of law, a machine designed to break human spirits through methods so calculated, so deliberately cruel, that medieval dungeons pale in comparison. By 1760, more than 200 crimes carried the death penalty: stealing a handkerchief worth more than 12 pence, death, cutting down a tree on someone else's property, death being found on a highway with your face blackened, death. And these were not ancient relics of barbaric times. These were modern statutes, passed by educated men in Parliament, men who wore silk stockings and quoted philosophy while constructing the most violent judicial system in European history. Picture this nightmare playing out across the empire. Children as young as 7 years old, dragged before magistrates for pickpocketing, sentenced to the same fate as murderers and rapists. A mother stealing bread for her starving family received identical punishment as a man who burned down a warehouse full of goods. The architects of this system were not accidentally cruel. They were precisely scientifically cruel. Sir William Blackstone, the most respected legal mind of the era, openly argued in his commentaries that the severity of punishment would create such terror in the hearts of common people that crime would simply disappear through fear alone. This was not justice. This was psychological warfare conducted in courtrooms, with judges as generals and the poor as enemy combatants. The numbers tell a story that British textbooks desperately tried to bury. Between 1770 and 1830, Britain executed more people per capita than any other nation in Europe. Over 90% of those who died were working class, their crimes born of desperation rather than malice. Meanwhile, wealthy defendants walked free through legal loopholes, royal pardons purchased with connections and coin. Justice was never blind in the British Empire. It saw everything, especially the difference between those with power and those without. But simple execution was just the beginning. When the empire wanted to send a message that would echo through generations when they wanted to demonstrate the absolute futility of resistance, they created punishments that transformed human bodies into propaganda, into living and dying advertisements of imperial power. If you are ready to descend into the shinjits of how Britain really controlled its empire, hit that subscribe button now, because what comes next will stay with you long after this video ends. The methods I am about to describe were not accidents of history. They were deliberate choices made by men who understood exactly what they were doing. Drawing and quartering was not an execution. It was theater, horror-made public spectacle, designed so that no one who witnessed it would ever forget the price of challenging royal authority. Guy Fawkes learned this in 1606, and what happened to him reveals the systematic cruelty hiding behind every powdered wig in Parliament. The body was quartered with professional precision, each piece serving a political purpose. The head went to London Bridge, where it remained on display for months, tarred and preserved in an iron cage. The 4 quarters were sent to different cities throughout the realm, many to the traitor's own hometown, so that everyone who knew him would see what remained. Mothers would shield their children's eyes. Men would walk faster past the rotting flesh, and everyone would remember. The preservation techniques revealed just how calculated this horror truly was. Executioners developed methods to prevent decay, boiling heads and body parts in salt water, coating them in tar, mounting them in specially constructed iron frameworks that kept them visible for years. These were not just warnings. They were long-term psychological operations designed to make resistance unthinkable. But drawing and quartering was reserved for the most serious offenses against the crown, for everyday control, for maintaining order in the colonies and on the seas and in the factories where the empire's wealth was generated. Britain needed methods that could be applied more broadly, more efficiently. They needed punishments that could break thousands rather than just a few. The cat of nine tails solved this problem perfectly. On Royal Navy ships where pressed men served against their will, where desertion meant survival and loyalty meant death in foreign waters, discipline had to be absolute. The cat was an instrument of scientific torture. 9 leather strands, each 3 feet long, weighted with lead shot and knotted at intervals to maximize tissue damage. Some versions included metal barbs designed to tear flesh with each strike, creating wounds that would never fully heal, scars that would mark a man for life as someone who had challenged authority and lost. The condemned was stripped and tied to a grating with arms stretched overhead. A drummer beat out rhythm for the lashes, each strike timed for maximum psychological impact. Ship surgeons monitored vital signs to prevent death, because death would end the lesson too quickly. 50 lashes could leave a man's back looking like raw meat. 300 lashes, reserved for the most serious offenses, could leave a sailor permanently disabled, unable to lift his arms above his head for the rest of his life. Captain James Cook's ship logs from his Pacific voyages document over 200 floggings during a single expedition, 12 lashes for drunkenness, 48 for theft, 300 for attempted mutiny. The entire crew was forced to watch every punishment, understanding clearly that they were witnessing their own potential fate. This was the empire that claimed to bring civilization to the world. This was the system of justice that British officials pointed to as evidence of their moral superiority. And this was only the surface. Transportation to Australia, pressing to death for those who refused to plead, gibbeting where criminals rotted in iron cages at crossroads for months, their bodies becoming road signs warning travelers of the cost of crime. Each method was carefully designed, precisely calibrated to achieve maximum terror with minimum expense. The British Empire was not built on tea and trade agreements. It was built on the systematic application of horror, on the calculated use of human suffering as a tool of control. For 300 years, this machine operated at full capacity, grinding through millions of lives, leaving scars that remain visible today if you know where to look. The descendants of the transported still live in Australia. The descendants of the flogged still carry those stories in family memory. And somewhere in Britain, in museums and private collections, the instruments of this terror still exist. The gibbets, the cats, the pressing stones. Silent witnesses to what really happened when an empire claimed to bring light to the world. Leave a comment below and tell me, did your ancestors live under this system? Do these stories exist in your family history? Because the chances are, if your family has any connection to the British Empire, somewhere in your past, someone experienced this terror firsthand, and that is a truth worth remembering.